chemistry and biology and physics are full of people who were pioneers in their field and pretty much gave their lives, in a way, finding out what everybody else needed to know.
August 14th, 1996. Dr. Karen Wetterhahn, a professor and chemist at Dartmouth College, prepares her lab station. On this particular day, Dr. Wetterhahn was testing how mercury ions interact with DNA. Wetterhahn studied toxic metal exposure. She was extremely influential, for there are few to none in the world more knowledgeable on this topic than her. Being an expert in her field, Dr. Wetterhahn always followed lab safety procedures, wearing her lab coat, goggles, latex gloves, and every known safety feature needed for her experiment. She and her lab station are prepared, so she begins her experimentation. While performing her tests, she accidentally spilled 2 drops of the substance she was working with on the back of her gloves. Wetterhahn did not think much of this. She thought she was protected by her gloves, so she goes on finishing up her experiment, cleaning up her station first, then removing her safety gear and washes her hands. In the following weeks after this day, Dr. Wetterhahn was starting to feel a little off. She noticed that her balance was a bit off, as well as her motor function skills. She found herself accidentally walking into walls, losing her balance and falling down, and missing objects she was intending on reaching for. One day she almost got into a car accident because her vision was foggy. Wetterhahn thought maybe she just was not getting enough sleep lately. She started having her husband drive her to work until she was well rested and felt like she was back to normal. Unfortunately, Dr. Wetterhahn's conditions did not improve. As days and weeks went on, she was experiencing episodes of abdominal pain and nausea, a harder time speaking and forming words. She described feeling a tingling sensation in her hands and would often see flashes of light that others were not experiencing. And with all these new conditions, her balance, motor function skills, and vision issues were getting even worse. Wetterhahn endured about 5 months of these symptoms. She realized these issues could not be from a lack of sleep, so she finally had her husband take her to the ER. She told nurses her symptoms and that she had lost 15 pounds in the past 2 months. The nurses performed several tests on her, testing her balance, coordination, speech, and hearing. With below average results on all of her tests, they knew something was seriously wrong. Her regression in daily functions showed signs of neurological decline, something that can be caused by exposure to toxic metals. Wetterhahn had to actively recall the time she spilt drops of mercury on her gloves. It was such a minor incident to her, and she was sure she had no physical contact with the substance without an external barrier. But upon blood tests, doctors discovered her blood mercury levels were 4,000 times greater than normal. The conclusion was her neurological decline was the result of mercury toxicity. But Dr. Wetterhahn's case is unlike typical mercury poisoning cases. Usually symptoms cease after you are no longer exposed to the chemical, but Wetterhahn's symptoms were getting even worse, at accelerating rates. See, what she was working with that day was not elemental mercury, the metal. It was an organic compound called dimethyl mercury, or organic mercury, a compound that absorbs well and fast into body tissue. At 5 months after exposure, doctors' tests showed there was 360 milligrams of mercury in her body, with the lethal limit being 400 milligrams. Doctors were trying to find a way to drain this toxic mercury out of her body. They gave her succimer, a medicine with molecules that trap heavy metals, so they could be excreted through her urine. She took 3 doses in a 24-hour period, and it was working. Tests from the next day showed the mercury in her urine increased by 160 times, and this continued over the course of the next week. Alas, this was not enough. Dr. Wetterhahn's conditions were getting even worse. At 3 weeks after being admitted into the ER, she became unresponsive to touch, verbal, and visual stimuli. She was now in a comatose-like state, having random episodes of eye openings, muscle jerks, and screaming. She was trying to communicate, but was trapped in her own body with no control. Even though mercury was extracted out of her bloodstream with the succimer, this is not where the majority of the toxicity was.
Well, primarily mercury and mercury salts, and for that matter, organic mercury compounds like methylmercury, they react aggressively with a couple of particular functional groups, which are well known in organic chemistry, thiol groups and amines. And thiol groups and amines have a way of placing themselves right at very important spots in biochemical systems.
The human brain is made up of 60% fat. This is where the mercury was accumulating. This allowed the mercury into her nervous system, spreading it down to her entire body, and gradually deteriorating her brain functions. Being an expert in her field, Dr. Wetterhahn knew what was to become of her at her diagnosis.
The sad truth was that she probably knew more about the chemistry of methylmercury than anybody else alive at that time. But she didn't really know what she needed to know about the chemical compatibility of gloves. And that turned out to be her downfall.
It was discovered after the fact that dimethylmercury can in fact penetrate through latex gloves within seconds and absorb into skin even faster. Scientists who work with dimethylmercury today are to wear 2 pairs of gloves, one highly resistant laminated glove under another pair of nitrile gloves. Dr. Wetterhahn passed away on June 6, 1997, but her story serves as the knowledge we know today about protecting yourself from the dangers that come from working with such a substance, and her legacy lives on through scholarships and tributes.
So, yeah, I mean, the sciences are pretty much littered by people who knew a lot but didn't know everything, and we learned a lot about safety sometimes through their mishaps.